Good evening, members, officers of the Council and members of the public. It's just gone 7, so we'll start. Welcome to this meeting of Governance and Audit Committee. I'm just going to go through the usual housekeeping, the fire evacuation procedure. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it is deemed safe to return the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? No? Great. Any member of the... Hang on, don't even need to say that bit. That's perfect. Restriction on mobile phones. Would everyone present please ensure your mobile phone is turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber while the meeting is in progress. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will be recorded and will subsequently be broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel. Rule 21, would any member who wishes to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 please announce it now? Great. I've got apologies for absence. There's been apologies received from Councillor Pugh. Has there any other apologies to give? No. Great. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Perfect. Moving on to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on 1st of December 2021. To approve the minutes of the meeting held on 1st December 2021, copy attached to the agenda pack. Can I have a proposer and a seconder?
Proposed, Chair.
It's proposed by Councillor Cupp and seconded by Councillor Towning. Unless I hear any objection, I will take these as approved. Perfect. We're going to move swiftly on to item number 4, which is our quarterly internal audit update report from Simon Webb from the East Kent Audit Partnership, who will introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is, of course, our quarterly internal audit update report, which summarises the work undertaken on your behalf by the East Kent Audit Partnership since the last meeting of this committee, together with the performance of the East Kent Audit Partnership to the 31st of December. If I could draw your attention to the table on page 15 of the agenda pack, that summarises the 10 reviews undertaken during this quarter. Quite a busy quarter with 10 reviews. We were pleased to report substantial assurance in 2 fairly significant areas of the Council's operations, those being council tax and also the payment of housing benefits. We concluded reasonable assurance in the areas of playgrounds and also creditors. Clearly, creditors is an important area of the Council's operations in terms of the amount of money that goes through those systems and indeed feeds into the Council's main financial systems. We concluded limited assurance in 2 areas, those being equality and diversity and also right to buy. We do have directors here this evening should members have questions in relation to those items. The reasons for those conclusions are detailed in the bullet points on the page on pages 21 through 23. We concluded no assurance in the area of street cleansing, and the reasons for that are summarised in the bullet points on page 24 through 26 of the agenda pack. Again, we do have directors here this evening to take members' questions on that, should you have any. We undertook 3 further reviews where an assurance opinion wasn't applicable. They were GDPR and particularly the impact of home working on GDPR in light of the global pandemic. The other area was a position statement in terms of the Council's controls to tackle climate change. And the final area was quarterly housing benefit testing, this time 21-22 quarters 1 and 2. Follow-up is a very important part of internal audit work. About 3 to 4 months after each audit review, we go back to ensure that the recommendations have been implemented. Details of the follow-ups undertaken in the quarter are on page 32 of the agenda pack, and there were 4 follow-ups during that period. We then have the annexes to the report. Annex 1 shows progress against the internal audit plan to the 31st of December, as at that time we'd completed 68.42% of your planned days, slightly behind the curve at 31st of December, but I can update that we were up to 85.25% as at 28th of Feb, so slightly ahead of the target at that point of 83%. So progressing well with the plan as we move into the final furlong of the year. Also within the report you have the definitions of the assurance levels and the recommendations. They're on page 38 of the pack. Annex 3 on page 39 shows the outstanding recommendations after follow-up, and Annex 4 on page 41 shows the limited areas yet to be followed up. They will be progressed to this committee in the forthcoming months. Finally, page 42 of the pack shows the balanced scorecard of performance indicators for the East Kent Audit Partnership. Probably the most important one on there is the progress against the plan, and as I indicated, it was 68.42% at December, but up to 85% at the end of last month. That concludes my presentation, Chair, but obviously happy to take any questions that members may have on any of the items raised. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a few questions on a couple of the areas. I'll run through them in the order they appear in the report rather than necessarily priority order, because it'll make it easier for me to do it. On the first couple of questions I've got is around playgrounds, which received a reasonable assurance, which is fine, but there were one or two areas of improvement that you identified. I just wanted confirmation. I understand the different tiers of inspections, tiers 1, 2 and 3 of inspections, tier 1 weekly, tier 2 quarterly and tier 3 annually. Can you confirm that all playgrounds in Thanet have been subject to these inspections over the last year, and if they have, are the reports available publicly to view? That's my first question. Shall I go for a couple and then you can answer them? Okay.
Yes, yeah, please, Councillor.
The ROSPA inspections, I've also wanted to just confirm that ROSPA inspections, are they the tier 3 inspections? Are they the same as the tier 3 inspections? And also, have they all be, if they're different, have they all been completed for the year 2021? And are they all publicly available? And the last bullet in that section around the funding structure, I think it mentions that some playgrounds were found to be either not set or not detailed, i.e. the funding structure for those. Is there a link here with, or no, what I mean is, does that mean that some playgrounds haven't got any funds available for their upkeep or update? And also, I think the other question was around, there's a mention of some being transferred to parish councils. I mean, or parish and town councils. I'm not aware of any playgrounds, any conversations being held around playgrounds being transferred to parish or town councils. Maybe if there any more information you could give me on that, if there is anything, any news on that, please. So maybe if you just do the playgrounds one and then I'll...
Thank you, Councillor. I didn't know if Mike, from an operational services point of view, you wanted to pick up on those points, and then I'll come back on any outstanding audit areas if need be. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I think that the first point was around the tiers. So our internal team who are qualified, they hold a qualification for playground inspection. they undertake the internal inspections, the weekly, the quarterly inspections. We use a contractor, so there's a ROSPA inspection annually on the playground. So we have an independent inspection annually. So does that answer that?
Yeah. So it was sort of confirmation that all playgrounds are covered by that roster inspection.
All playgrounds are, yeah. So our team inspect all playgrounds, and then they receive a ROSPA inspection.
And are those reports available to be viewed?
In general, the reports are available. They're not published, with the exception of the Ethelbert Crescent Viking ship report, which is published on the website currently.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think the final question was about transfer into parish and town councils. I didn't know anything about any being available for transfer to parish and town councils.
So historically, there have been transfers. I think the most recently at Westgate, the St Crispin's rec one has been transferred to the town council. I don't believe there's anything currently, in progress about transfer.
Okay, thank you. I think the next one I wanted to ask about is street cleansing. I guess maybe if would like a bit more of an explanation, I think, from Mike or Gavin about this complete divergence between the lack of assurance, lack of ability to provide a review and any assurance at all, and the statement which I have read through, which sort of answers some of the reasons for it, and it always seems like I could sort of understand how a few points might be raised that that you might disagree with, but this is sort of poles apart. On one side, it's total lack of any assurance, and on the other side, you're, I think, shall I say, very disappointed about it. Maybe if you could explain some of the reasons behind why there's no lack of assurance and what you're going to do, so as when we're here next year, we get a report which says there's reasonable, if not better, assurance for our street cleansing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. I think the first thing to say is there is an action plan in the attached to the audit, and I accept that there's actions that need to be taken forward, and we will be progressing those actions. I think where where I disagree with the outcome of the audit is because it doesn't. It's not reflective of the work, the very hard work that goes on, particularly the work through the pandemic, and the level of street cleanliness that's out that's exhibited out there, and and the hard work of the team. And I think there's a lot of work that we are doing. We have a project, for example, on to bring forward the measurement of street cleansing, so it's more transparent, which we're almost ready to go live with, and various other things with our environmental operatives who are responsible for doing sort of deep cleansing, graffiti removal, the sort of the one-off things that just make our local environment better. I think the audit for me was quite. It focused quite heavily on mechanical sweeping and some parts of the street cleansing, without looking at some broader parts of the service, such as all the work we do around the beaches in the summer, the 600 plus bins that we empty regularly, and the against the backdrop of what was a very difficult couple of years through the pandemic, and the huge quantity, the tons and tons of waste, additional waste that the team coped with, whilst all the time having to maintain, a statutory service and a statutory waste and recycling service, the household service. And, I think what's worthy of note is that, throughout that period, we were able to continue to deliver our household waste service with support from the street cleansing service where necessary. So I think, I'm understanding of the fact that this audit is about, the risk to the authority and, and acknowledge and accept that there's some actions that need to be taken forward, which we will do in the prescribed timescale. But the report to me is not reflective of the hard work and the quality of the service that that the team provide.
If I could just come, I certainly share some of what you said, your opinion about the hard work of the staff. I've witnessed how hard they've had to work, certainly in my ward, to clear a lot of fly tipping, as you're aware, around various areas. So we are grateful for that, certainly. It just seems that maybe the scope for the audit maybe needs to change, and maybe from audit you could comment that it doesn't seem to be auditing the right thing. Would that be a correct way of putting it?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. As we're recognising, the audit was looking for key controls in this process in terms of setting the standard, delivering the service, measuring the performance and feeding that back. So that control feedback loop is a standard process that we're looking for, which from the findings and the bullet points you can see was missing. And that these are the actions that fall into the action plan. So absolutely understand the idea of looking at service delivery, but every audit is an opportunity for a catalyst for change, for improvement, for looking at different ways of achieving things. And I think we're talking about the measurement and the performance management of this very key service. It's a key corporate objective for the council. Absolutely agree with everything that's said in terms of pandemic and resources being moved around and the huge effort. And I think it's often difficult to understand that an audit it's a critical friend in the sense of a fresh pair of eyes looking at things, but what we're looking for is that control feedback loop, and that clearly wasn't here at this time. And it's really good news for this committee, who our job is to provide that assurance to members of this committee that those things are working and you can measure them, they're tangible. That we're hearing that the action plan is being dealt with, and some things are even imminent. So we would welcome the opportunity to come back to you in the future and say, yep, things are embedded, they're working, and you can now rely on those internal controls. It's a slightly different thing to what's actually happening out there on the street. So I do appreciate that. But hopefully we can work together when we scope the next audit to see, well, what's the key risk at this time? And it isn't completely unusual. It happens where we have a service having a different opinion to what we find. But as you know, our work is evidence-based. We've gone to look for key things, and when they're not there, then we have to report those things to you. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Just going to interject. Do you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. If I may, I really want to kind of really support the comments from both Christine and from Mike, and just to say that actually, I think the whole process is quite reassuring that actually this does provide an opportunity, because at the end of the day, internal audit have a very specific role and add value to what we're doing as an organisation, and that function is very clear. Just to say that actually, and to clarify, directors do have the opportunity to agree the brief before the audit is undertaken. But understandably, at the end of the day, particularly in operational services, but not solely, these are very complex services at times. There's a whole range of contexts that actually, the officers feel it's important to provide you with reassurance that although there are some issues that internal audit are quite rightly raising around controls and that process that Christine's talked to us quite rightly about. It's also to provide you with reassurance that there are reasons for that. Sometimes it's resources, sometimes it's just the complexity of the service, and we have to look at it, and it's just a reminder about there's a broader perspective to consider. So I don't think it's unhealthy to have different perspectives on this at all. I think that's what this process is around, which is why managers do get an opportunity to provide their response so you can see it from their perspective. But clearly, you know, internal audit has a very specific and very important function in relation to making sure that we continue to improve and make sure we're getting these things right. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you very much for letting me do that.
Councillor Hopkinson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's clearly true. We've been operating in very difficult circumstances the last year or two, and also, I've no doubt it's also true. Our staff are working very hard, and they should be given credit for that. I just wanted to ask for a clarification on. So the bullet point on page 24, that the lack of service standards. So just check my understanding. Does that mean that there aren't criteria for measuring the success of the delivery of the service? Is that what it means? And if that's the case, apologies if this is in the report, but could you update us on what the plan is with that, just particularly given that it's been highlighted in previous reports.
Yes, so it means currently that there aren't TDC published service standards about the level of cleanliness and how that how that links with the code of practice for street cleanliness for litter and detritus. But that's one of the actions in the audit plan to put that in place. Yeah.
I would say, I'll just clarify. We did find a service standard, didn't we? But I think it wasn't published. So I think what we just need to do is expand on that, and it's really around what people can expect from us and what we expect from them as well. So it's sort of setting those standards, because obviously we do need support of local residents as well in terms of keeping our streets clean. It's not just our issue; it's also one for all our communities as well. So that'll be included in that standard as well.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I do agree with that sentiment that it's it's the community as a whole as well as the council that we address it collectively. So can I just apologies, because I'm sure this is in the report and I've perhaps not seen it, but could you give us a bit of detail about what's the plan for what information exactly will be published and how that will be published for the public to be informed about this?
Well, the service standard will describe the expectation, the level of cleanliness, and it will talk about how we monitor. So what can be expected, how we will monitor it. So it's along those lines. It's difficult to describe it in any more detail before we've finalised it. But yeah, it's those sort of things. It's a service standard for what can be expected for street cleansing. There is, yeah. So I believe it's the audit action plan. I think it's September. I think I'm right in saying. So for example, for our street bins now, instead of street bins just being emptied by the team on a sort of a continual rotational basis, we've now got an app that our team use where they can each time they empty the bin, they record that they empty it, they record how much waste was in the bin, and it allows us to to focus those resources better, so that they're not just going to bins that may only be half empty. In theory, we get to a point where they only empty those bins at the point it needs to be emptied. So we increase the frequency on the ones that are always full and decrease it on the ones that are not. So that's a sort of a QR code based system where they scan the bin as they empty it.
And I would clarify, we've got a new application as well, which we're training some of our staff to use, where some of our staff will go and take photographs, and then they'll get to grade the quality of the streets. And then what that would do is over obviously 6 to 12 months, we'll start getting that intelligence. So then we can start focusing targeting our resources in areas where we know we've got continual problems. And that's due to be rolled out in the next month or so. Yeah. I mean, what we wanted to do, I know I've spoke to it previously, is involve members of the public as well, but I don't think we're ready for that, because we're conscious that they'll just say, well, it doesn't meet the standards, it doesn't meet the standard, because they want their streets to be absolutely spotless, don't they? And that's not a deliverable. But with our team doing it, we're more than and we've got that evidence as well to show it.
So any other questions on the street cleansing bit? Yes, Councillor Duckworth.
Yeah, I agree with the engagement with the public, and on a very practical level, a lot of work has been, I'll give you a specific example because it might be able to be replicated elsewhere. So Athelston Road Paladin bins, the removal of those seems to have been very successful, but I do think that the problem might have moved elsewhere. And talking to residents, there's still some residents who don't seem to have a wheelie bin or access to one. So, and obviously, and I've seen it, if bin bags are being dumped, then immediately, once the seagulls get to them, they're just going to be, that's going to cause a problem with litter. And it's not necessarily people dumping it. So I think more engagement would be good to find out exactly who hasn't got those bins and it doesn't really know. And the other thing is perhaps charging for bins a false economy. I don't know, if somebody arrives at a property, moves into one and doesn't have a bin, they phone up and they're told it costs X amount of money. They could take the decision they can't afford it. So it might be a false economy. It might be something worth looking into. I mean, you'd probably need to do an investigation to see what the response is when people phone up and ask for one, but it might be worth looking into to see. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of, in terms of the figures of sort of bins, we collect from about 68,000 properties for domestic waste. About 58,000 of those properties receive a standard fortnightly collection. So they have a black bin, a blue bin, a red bag, and a food caddy. So it's the 10,000 properties that don't have that. And the reason they don't have those is because they haven't got anywhere to store a bin, or it's flats or other apartments other types of accommodation. Where that's the case, they either have seagull proof bags or they're on sack collections. And I agree, we're in a coastal town and seagulls are a problem, and that's why we have the seagull proof bags and try and do everything, encourage our residents to only put the waste out at the time, at the correct time. We do see problems where people take their waste elsewhere. They put the waste in street bin, household waste in street bins, which obviously they shouldn't be doing. And those, those are sort of problems that we're aware of, and we can tackle those things with enforcement or with education. In terms of charging for bins, we can do that, and it's obviously there's a cost to the bins, and we've got to think about the budgets, and the service is obviously budgets particularly a critical point. Under the Environmental Protection Act, we can charge for those containers for which have to be presented for waste collection. So it's something that's currently in place to do that. So you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I know Bob will probably confirm, we have done a lot of work with the housing team previously with regards to, it's quite a transient population in some areas, isn't it? And we have done obviously leaflets in different languages, advice about seagull proof bags. So it's just an ongoing campaign, and engaging with the landlords as well to make sure they're taking responsibility, not just for providing sufficient containers, but having those containers in suitable locations where we can get access, because you know yourself, it's quite difficult for us sometimes, but obviously we do work with all partners, the community and the housing team to try and resolve issues when we see them come forward.
Just one small point to add to that. In the Cliftonville selective licensing area, obviously that designation has ended now, but the licences that we've issued are still valid and for the whole 5-year period. They do require the landlord to maintain reasonable arrangements for the storage of refuse for their tenants, and if we can demonstrate the landlord is not doing that, then there's potential to take enforcement action against that licence.
Thank you. Yeah, I did just want to ask one further question. You've reminded me of it, talking about enforcement there earlier. I think we all know and acknowledge that there is a lot of fly tipping that causes a big problem. I mean, I'm sure it's right across the district, but I'm familiar with St Peter's and businesses that fly tip in the bins in the car park station. How much enforcement action actually is there? I mean, how many prosecutions, would you be able to tell us how many prosecutions there have been by the council of people fly tipping? Because I know it's a real concern for the majority of businesses who do pay to have their rubbish taken away properly. So is there any figures available?
That actually fits within a different service area. Yes, there are. I would say the amount of prosecutions has reduced dramatically over the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And we know we've had issues, but we do have an active team out there. You might be aware, I think 2 years ago, we introduced the fixed penalty notice of £400. So actually, if we catch people fly tipping and we've got enough evidence, we can issue with them fixed penalty notice for £400 rather than taking them through prosecutions. And we also, in terms of if we catch people in duty care issues, we can give them formal warnings and they can pay for the cost of removal, etc. But actually, at this moment in time, I think we're doing a fundamental review of that standard and actually how we're going to move that forward. Because one of the issues for me, particularly having some previous experience in enforcement, is the time and effort it's taking us and the resources required internally to get to a stage 6 months down the line where we're prosecuting people, and what that level of prosecution is and what the value is to both the community and the council in terms of that time and effort. So this is something that we're looking at in the next few months.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just going back to it was good to hear about the technologies you're looking to introduce. And I just wondered, perhaps a question for the Chair, when we get a chance to hear about how they're going and the effects that's having. So I just wonder when that might come back for this committee. Would it be the next quarterly internal audit update, perhaps? I don't know.
I believe that'd be the follow-up, possibly.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, the follow-up will come forward to this committee, the timing of which is dependent upon the dates agreed with management for the implementation of the recommendations. Clearly, one of the key ones is the service standards. I think Mr Humber indicated September for that, so clearly there wouldn't be a great deal of merit in bringing or undertaking the follow-up and reporting it to this committee until at least September. So you're probably looking at the end of September or the December meeting before we could meaningfully report back on the follow-up. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. I guess a comment for me regarding the street cleansing is it seems that there's almost similar to Councillor Clark, a different viewpoint. I think no one here is questioning the performance. It's just more about mitigating risk and the control measures. One of the small things is about the mechanical sweeps, and I think that's the reason it's been picked up is more about in terms of value for money. It's a big investment, and the investment has been going up each year, and it's the output hasn't been great. You've mentioned about plans moving forward. I just wondered, are any of those going to involve more investment? And is there anything that you can do with the mechanical sweepers so that we do get value for money out of them?
Thank you, Chair. I suppose from my point of view, I'm a bit disappointed because there was a lot of effort for me and portfolios at the time in terms of that investment in mechanical sweepers because we didn't have them. It's clear that actually the smaller mechanical sweepers haven't worked in the district, particularly in the environment around the coast because of the sand. It's quite abrasive and it has had a bit of an impact in terms of the vehicles and sustaining them and the amount of repairs and maintenance that are required. So I think we actually are at this moment in time due to replace that fleet, and we are looking at alternatives and really looking at larger vehicles, and also the use of other technologies as well. I think you have to appreciate, and this is quite an important point, is we have an ageing workforce, and that ageing workforce are not really that interested in using new types of technology. They're quite happy with the sweepers and the barrows, which is fine, but there is technology available out there that we could be utilising, and that's what we're doing as part of that transition now. Like I say, is we'll be looking at sort of larger sweepers, less of them, but they can cover larger areas, and then looking at alternatives in the streets, etc. But I think it's just that balance, and I think what we really need to express is, and we haven't really promoted it, I don't think, as well as we could, is this idea with regards to environmental operatives, which is a total change from this is a multitasking team. As part of the budget, we're going to bring in some more, so we're going to have up to 9 of these environmental operatives, and what they do is they go into targeted areas, and they do a multitude of tasks. So they don't just do street cleansing, they fix furniture, they fix signs, they generally do cut grass, they do a whole range of tasks, and it provides a huge benefit to obviously those areas, and has been very, very well received. And we have been working with the town and parishes, etc., and they've been giving us the locations, and we've been going in there. I think what we've not been good at is actually telling people that's what we're doing, but that's part of that transition, and they're using available technology. And actually, those teams are trained to use all the technology, so they can ride mowers, they can use sweepers, they can use our trucks, diggers, etc. So they can go in and do a multi-filter task, which is a totally different way of working, which we're likely to see significant improvements.
Okay, and leading on to that point from sort of a public engagement side of things, is there anything you can do in terms of, and it might help in terms of you showing what you're doing to the public, but actually pre-warning residents when you're targeting particular areas? So, you might get more people to move their cars out of the way, and therefore it becomes more effective. It might sound a bit timely, but I'm sure you can find a routine to do it. But actually it almost is a self-fulfilling prophecy to let you show what you're doing, and therefore residents are more aware of it because they'll see that you've done it and they've had the warning as well.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of the environmental operatives came from experience I'd had where I'd worked in a local authority where we covered 1,000 square miles. So actually quite a large area, and what we used to do was sort of targeted impact, where we'd go into certain areas, and this is part of that programme. But also what we used to do as part of that programme is work with partners, so work with KCC in terms of highways, so we can get them to do some of the drainage, they can do some of the lining work, also work with the community, particularly the school kids. So we had the school kids coming out and doing litter picks as well with the community and fixing furniture. So this is part of the conversation we've been having with some of the parishes, and we're sort of moving that forward, aren't we? Yes. And that'll be, for me, is we can't get everywhere, but I think it's going to look like probably a 2-year period of work where we can say we're going to be in this location. We'll speak to people, ask them what they need doing, and then obviously ask them to support and come out with us as well, so they can see that benefit as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Are there any questions on any of the other issues within this report from any members? Okay, well, I've got a couple, so I'll pleasure. Regarding the playground inspections, it mentioned 2 of the inspectors were operating under expired certificates. Do we know how much by, and how long do these certificates usually last?
I'm afraid I haven't got that information to hand, but I can come back and confirm.
Okay, is that something that's normally gained from once the person has got the role, or do you employ people with the role? I'm just thinking, like, if you have a staff turnover, that's a lot of admin and cost to train them and get them licensed.
Yeah. So to talk about the staff that we've currently got, they've all gained the qualification while they've been here, while they've worked here. So they didn't arrive, they didn't come to the council with that qualification.
Next question would be, under equality and diversity training, was there any particular reason for the low take-up amongst staff to have completed this training? I'm not sure who that's going to go to, but presumably you, there we go. You can fight over it if you want. Let's make it equal.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. So the equality and diversity training is something that we're actively looking at with the new HR team. So we're currently working with both online resources, and also there's somebody who works for Folkestone High District Council with expertise in this area, and we're looking at rolling out and promoting take-up of the training as well. It is something that's been a bit lacking, but we're on it and dealing with it.
I think just as, I think we completely accept and acknowledge this. I think partly this is e-learning training. And I think as a result, this is not an excuse at all. We do need to address it. But I think because of the pandemic, the way we've been working, this has probably slipped off people's radar quite significantly, e-learning generally. And I think as part of the approach, particularly around this very important subject, I think the learning we're now, the training we're now doing, I think I've got this right, haven't I, Estelle, is actually an actual course that we're running, is compulsory for all staff to be doing, rather than the e-learning. Yeah. But it's something we need to think about in the future, about how we actually undertake this very important training in respect of ourselves, especially now we're flexibly working, and whether the e-learning is the right package, or whether we need to think of a different way of doing some of the training.
Almost like a corporate induction, kind of build it into
exactly.
it, new starters.
Yeah.
Okay. On page 23, now I got concussion at the weekend, so I do apologise if my maths isn't great, but I was looking at the table with regards to the right to buy, and where it's got, someone might need to explain this, but total applications received, where you've got 31, 34 and 50, going along where they've been broken down to the right, the top row actually only adds up to 17. So I wasn't sure if there's been some that have just randomly disappeared, and the middle one's fine, and then the bottom one goes to 48 and not 50, which I didn't know whether those ones were potentially live, but it's just the top one just looked a bit peculiar.
I don't think we know the answer to that, I'm afraid. But we can go away and check the numbers for you and confirm. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. I thought I was just seeing things, and I had to double check it. But
they definitely don't add up to that.
Okay, brilliant. And one small thing. In fact, that's the next item, so I won't even comment on that. So, members, any other questions? Perfect. The recommendations is that the report is received by members. That any changes to the agreed 2021-2022 internal audit plan resulting from changes in perceived risk detailed at point 5.0 of Annex 1 of the attached report be approved. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposed by Councillor Cupp and seconded by Councillor Dexter. Unless I hear any objection, I will take this as approved. Brilliant. Moving on to agenda item 5, the draft internal audit plan for 2022 to 2023. I will introduce you to Christine Parker from East Kent Audit Partnership.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, members, before we get to discussing the plan itself, I'll just take you through the covering report by way of introduction. The first paragraph really is just for you to note the important role that this committee does play to ensure the governance, risk and control environment is appraised. And the other point to note at this point is a strategic plan that we're showing you multiple years, but we're only looking to agree the next 12 months programme of work this evening. Paragraph 2 talks about the mission and the charter, and members who've been long serving on the committee will remember the charter would come back annually with the plan, but it's a document that doesn't have many changes annually. We agreed that the next time it would need to come back would be in 2023, and I can confirm there's no significant changes to the version, so we aren't presenting it this evening. It's available at any time members need to see it, and we haven't changed the mission in that paragraph. So moving to the process to date that has formed this draft risk-based plan that's before you this evening. In accordance with our professional standards, there's a process behind this, and it involves multiple sort of sources of information in terms of looking at the corporate risk registers, looking at what we know, trends nationally and others in local government, speaking to directors around what systems are changing, what new legislation is impacting, all the things that are likely to be happening in their areas. And then we take that broader view. The Institute of Internal Auditors survey all sectors, and for the sort of purpose of comparing us as well to that, we've included the top 10 risks from that survey. So the risks listed 1 to 10 in paragraph 3.3 onwards are national. They're certainly not Thanet's risks, and they're broader than local government. They weren't. That none of those will surprise you, of course, with cyber security, and I think with the added pressure with international events with Russia and other matters, these things become very, very real. We're all sort of aware of attacks on our own identity theft and phishing emails and other IT issues. So it's a constant sort of issue of trying to encourage educate staff to not click on any link and to send things that they're not sure about to IT for checking through. So naturally, the East Kent Services element of the plan has our IT provision in there, and that's part of this report. I won't go through 1 to 10 in detail. I'm sure you've read them all, but it's really to provide you with the assurance that we've considered them all and then either built them into the proposed plan or not for the reasons that we have given. And I think we notice, whilst climate seems to be sort of lower down at number 8, I think we're noticing that this is going to be a top level risk that we live with now for the future. We're recognising that, and obviously we have done some work this year with climate, and we've got a further 5 days there. So moving through the report, in terms of how we then have assessed it, in terms of the core assurance work, any fraud work, any other areas of risk that we need to cover. We cover the benchmarking provision just so that you've got a sense of how this plan fits within the wider picture, and I can then further go on to commend the plan to you. The plan itself is set out on pages 53 to 58, and the recommendation or the options members are to approve the plan as drafted, or very much to take any consideration of comments and amendments that members may wish to make to adjust the plan. So happy to take any comments. Thank you.
Councillor Duckworth.
Yeah, just on item 10, the health and safety. With coronavirus, will the council be encouraging people to stay off work if they do have COVID symptoms, even though it's no longer a legal requirement?
Thank you, Chair. In respect of COVID-19, we're now moving to a position where COVID-19 will be treated in respect of normal sickness absence. So if an individual member of staff has symptoms for COVID, we would be expecting them, if they are ill, not to be at work and to follow our sickness absence process and to actually register that sickness through our system. That's how we will be intending to deal with it. Thank you.
Any other questions from members? No. Christine, on paragraph 6, financial resilience, page 49, it says MTPF. Is that meant to be MTFP?
Yes.
Cool. The recommendation is to members approve the council's internal audit plan. Please can I have a proposer and a seconder. Proposed by Councillor Duckworth and seconded by Councillor Shrub. Unless I hear any objection, I take this as approved. Perfect. Moving on to agenda item 6, corporate risk management, the quarterly update. I will now call upon Mr. Blundell to introduce the review of corporate risks.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. This is our regular updates on our approach to risk management, setting out the highest scoring corporate risks that the authority is considering. They're set out on the table on section 4 of the report, and then there's further detail in section 5 to explain what the reports are, in the report to set out what those risks are. You'll see in the table at 4.2 The only change from the previous report that came to the committee last time around is a reduced risk for COVID-19, largely reflecting the end of restrictions and the explanation the Chief Executive just gave in terms of how we'll be treating sickness absence in relation to COVID-19. Aside from the scores not changing, there are just some other things I'd like to just bring attention to. It has already been referenced already in terms of cyber attack by Christine Parker. Obviously, the events in Ukraine are at the forefront of management's mind, and we will be considering an item on not just cyber insurance, but other measures we can take to protect ourselves and bolster our defences, and that will come to our corporate management team in the coming weeks. And our IT team and digital teams are looking at that actively. There's an update, obviously, where we are in terms of governance. Although the scores haven't changed, the members will be aware of the update that the external independent monitoring officer was given initially to our general purpose committee, and that's explained in the report. Over and above that, there is an update on unlimited resources. It's very pleasing. Obviously, the budget was approved at council last month. However, as it's set out, I've set out on this report, and I've said on a number of occasions, the funding landscape for local government still remains very uncertain, and that's reflected in the risk score. And again, economic resources sets out an unchanged score. It's not just Brexit and COVID, but we're aware, obviously, the turbulent times in the economy. Inflation is very high, and there are disturbances in the supply chain across the economy, and that's something that we're monitoring and continue to try and manage, be that through market supplements or other measures that we need to take. In addition to the risks set out in the report, Annex 1 provides some details of the lower scoring risks, as previously requested by the committee. And just in terms of a verbal update for reference, we're currently working on a new risk management strategy that went through our corporate management team this week, and I'll be bringing this to the next meeting of the committee for feedback and input and for further review and comments. So happy to take any further questions members have on the content of this report. Thank you.
Councillor Duckworth.
Yeah, just a quick one. The Cabinet Risk Champion, I think it's the wrong portfolio title. I know they do change quite often. So that's page 67, 3.5. I think it might be the leader, actually. Might be within the leader's portfolio. But there isn't a corporate and governance and coastal development.
Correct. I think that's just something that's a legacy that's not been updated for a change.
Just
that
for
will
transparency, so that.
Thank you. Yes, we'll get that updated.
Councillor Garner.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we're used to come to this point of the agenda, I think, and seeing red all over the report. Some of these risks, some of these areas, obviously are out of our control, but some of them are within our control. So those that are within our control, how confident are we that we will come to one of these meetings and see a reduction in any of these areas? Do we have a cogent plan for some of these areas? That I know there is some description of what's happening with them, but what sort of timescales are we talking to? It would be nice if it wasn't all red at one of the meetings.
I think that's an entirely valid question, and I think probably the items that we potentially have some control over as an organisation that we would be looking to see some change in are probably those that are obviously going to be impacted by the outcome of the Independent Monitoring Officer's report, which I would anticipate is certainly going to reflect how we move forward around the governance and reassurance around that. I think political stewardship is something that we've talked about already reviewing, so I would anticipate that changing in due course. I think, I don't know about homelessness. I mean, that's still a big issue, so I think we probably think that's probably going to stay red at the moment. COVID-19, I think, we still need to manage that risk in the sense of it still exists. Will we get any other variants that we then have to deal with? But on the basis of the approach that government are currently taking about learning to live with it, I think probably we should see a reduction in that risk, because we should have mitigation and controls and plans in place for managing that. So the Environmental Act is a bit of an unknown quantity at the moment still, but yeah, I think certainly over the next 6 months we'd probably expect to see some change in some of those numbers on that. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Just to add that there are obviously other risks that aren't included in this this table. The reason there's red all over it is that we tend to bring we present the highest scoring risks, which are scored red. Some of them will drop down, as the Chief Exec said, through the passage of time, and as those risks sort of develop and we get a better understanding of what action we need to take to mitigate them. But our risk management strategy is the update to it is proposing a slightly different approach, a bit more nuanced, where we'll be categorising some of our risks in a different way as well. Not saying that will effectively change the scoring. There'll probably still be a large degree in red here, but hopefully there'll be a bit more nuance in there to give you more detailed information around the nature of the risk and the actions that have been taken to mitigate them.
Something that sort of jumped out at me under cyber attack. You've mentioned the recent attempts to send emails to staff from internal email addresses, such as the chief executives. I don't know if you've got any. Well, what exactly has happened?
They are, in terms of this specific one, that there are phishing attempts or other attempts where someone will attempt to present themselves as a TDC officer, in this instance as the chief executive, and send a message round saying, please click this link because of XYZ. I can't remember the specifics of this, but that it's not just limited to that instance there, and this is obviously not just limited to Thanet District Council. This is tactics that fraudsters and cyber attackers undertake across all areas of society, and something that we're trying our best to protect ourselves against. But unfortunately, these cyber attackers are very skillful, and it's a developing sort of picture as they develop their skills. We have to react in a responsive sort of manner to as their tactics and their approaches change.
Councillor Hopkinson.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask for a slight clarification, because I assume that political stewardship refers to, the balance of power amongst the different political groups in the chamber. But I don't know if I misunderstood, but were you not implying that that this is somehow under sort of management? There isn't something that can be done about it other than, in the next election, basically?
Well, I think what we've already identified is currently, obviously, we have a Conservative. I think it's been a number of changes in administration as part of this for the last period since the last election. You're right, we are entering an election year for our local elections in 2023, but I think the longer the current administration is in place, and obviously part of that is around kind of the numbers position around party numbers, then I think from that we gain more sustainability and stability as a result of that. So the longer that goes on, then that risk obviously starts to reduce. That's the approach that we take kind of to the political. The current scoring of that does reflect the fact that we have been through a number of changes over the last few years in respect of administration and party numbers, but the more that remains consistent and improves, then obviously that stability can be established and that risk comes down. Okay. But you're right, we've got an election coming, so I'm sure we'll see what happens as a result of that as well.
Are there any other comments or questions from members? Okay, I'll move the recommendation, which is to consider the corporate risks identified in the report, to consider the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements and the control environment, and consider their assurance with the action that is being taken on risk-related issues. Please can I have a proposer and a seconder. Proposed by Councillor Cupp, seconded by Councillor Hopkinson. Unless I hear any objection, I will take this as approved. Great. Moving on to agenda item 7 and back to Chris Blundell for the statement of accounts update.
Thank you, Chair. This is a multifaceted report relating to last year's, this year's and next year's accounts and audit, providing an update on where we are with those. Firstly then, so the last year's 2021 accounts that are currently being audited, typically they would have come to committee already to be approved, and we would hope actually that they would have come tonight for approval. However, despite the fact the audit is largely complete, there are still two critical judgment items that need to be determined and resolved. We're a couple of weeks away from getting that done. So with the chair's agreement, we'll be looking to arrange a meeting sometime in May, most likely to approve the accounts, so we're not waiting to the next scheduled meeting, so we get the accounts approved as soon as possible. Looking towards the next year's accounts, so for 21-22, the same deadlines are still in place as the current year. So draft accounts by the 1st of August will need to be published, which we hit last year, and auditors' accounts finalised by the 30th of September. However, only 9% of audits were actually done by that 30% of the way. 9% of audits, apologies, put my teeth back in. 9% of audits were finished by the 30th of September deadline. So we're not alone, and that stat's not improved drastically, only 40% by the end of December. That has then led CITFA to launch an emergency, sounds rather exciting, but it's not as exciting as it sounds, an emergency consultation on changes to accounting standards. That's how we like to excite ourselves as accountants, talking about emergency consultations to accounting standards. We've provided a response to that consultation. It's not going to affect us significantly because we've already done a large proportion of the work, and that's sent out at Annex 1. To be honest with you, it's just me having a bit of a rant at CITFA and the standard setters, so feel free to have a look at that and comment if you wish. My general observation of it is they've missed the points. It's not really an issue with the standards, it's just a condition of the state of the audit market at the moment is a real issue of why we're not getting the audits completed. In other words, there's not enough audit firms out there doing it, and there's not enough auditors available to do the audits. Finally, in terms of this report, looking for the accounting policies for next year, they're included as an annex for the committee's approval, but there's no change from this year's, partly as a result of that emergency consultation. So not anything hugely exciting in there, but again, something for the committee to approve because they become effective from the 1st of April. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions or comments? Nope, it was obviously too exciting, Chris. You've all stunned them all. So moving on to the recommendations. One, that the committee notes the progress with the audit of the 2020-21 statement of accounts, that the committee notes the statutory audit deadlines for 2021/22. The committee notes the council's response to the consultation on the time-limited changes to the Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting as set out in Annex 1, and that the committee approves the 2022/23 accounting policies as set out in Annex 2 of this report. Please may I have a proposer and a seconder. Proposed by Councillor Schrobb and seconded by Councillor Duckworth. Unless I hear any objection, I will take this as approved. Perfect. Back to Chris Blundell for agenda item 8. It is the 2021/22 waivers.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully an item of a bit more interest this time around rather than just accounting standards updates. So I'm hoping this will be the first of many regular updates to the committee on the use of procurement waivers. So the report sets out some context on how our procurement system works here at Thanet and the framework that's in place, and that's detailed on our contract standing orders. Section 3 of the report sets out how the default position for our procurement process is really to put contracts out into the sort of competitive bidding arena, and then tables 1 and 2 set out the different limits that are in place and the different methods that are followed depending on the value and the type of contract it is. Obviously, the more detailed processes are understandably required for higher value contracts. Following on from that, section 4 explains how if a contracting manager, so typically a budget holder, wants to deviate from our standard processes and the methods that are in place for procurement, that a waiver must be obtained, and there's certain circumstances that this can be applied, and they're explained in the report. Finally, moving on to section 6, which sets out the actual incidents and number of waivers that have been applied and approved in 21-22. First off, I just want to apologise. There's a typo in the table. I'm not looking into the future. It refers to the 18th of September 2022. That should be 18th of February. But you can see there have been 45 waivers approved in the year to date, of which 3 were rejected, out of the total of 48. You see the vast majority of them are actually for lower value, so less than £100,000 contracts, and that's the actual value of the contract over the duration of its life, not the annual spend. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Garner.
Yeah, thank you. I think something that would help would actually be to understand what the situation is with waivers in other district councils in East Kent. That would help to give us an idea of if is this sort of an extraordinarily high number, an extraordinarily low number, or is this the sort of thing that goes on in Dover and Canterbury and Folkestone Hythe, please.
That's something we can look at. We need to see what's published in terms of their information. I'm not sure offhand. The general rule is, as I kind of said, waivers should be exceptional because we should go out to the market. However, there are valid reasons why we would use waivers in some instances. For example, some of them may just be we've gone out to the market. Our contract standing orders say that we need 3 bidders to come back and only 2 have replied. So we've got to, instead of going back out again with slightly different specification or requirements, we say, well, that's satisfactory and that's good enough. Or it may be because there's a specialised nature of a particular type of contract and we've got continuity with the existing supplier and we know it will provide best value to use them. So the underlying reason really why you would use a waiver is because to deviate from going out to the market, we can demonstrate we're getting value for money. But I hear what you're saying around the context of what is good, what is normal. Obviously, there's no, we're not the same size or got the same makeup as even neighbouring authorities, but it's something we can look at to try and add some context.
If I could, if you wouldn't mind, because I would assume that they would be very similar. Because if you need 2 or 3 competitive bids for each one, and we're not able to find 2 or 3, then it would be the same in neighbouring districts.
That's fair comment. The one caveat I would add to that is obviously we have in-house direct services for the likes of waste collection, street cleansing, where some of those services would be outsourced under one contract. So obviously there's you've almost disaggregate to a larger number of contracts because we're dealing with the operation of those services directly. Obviously, and bringing in, even if you could to look at trends, bringing in the likes of our tenant and leaseholder services would bring in the scope for more waivers, and that doesn't mean we're doing worse because we've got more than last year, but in context we've got more direct control over our spend, which gives greater opportunity for waivers. But I'll do what I can to provide meaningful and fair comparison, but I don't want to set us up with an unfair comparison against other authorities that aren't in the same sort of situation as us.
Sorry, just one. I guess the key word you mentioned around waivers is exceptional. So I can see there has been a slight reduction over the last 3 years, which is a good thing. So we would want to be working towards further reductions in the use of waivers, wouldn't we? I'm just seeking confirmation in that.
I think that's a fair observation, but I wouldn't want to have some sort of arbitrary target set that says, oh, we're only aiming for 30 waivers. No year is typical. I mean, and particularly we may see an uptick in waivers because we've got a huge capital programme over the next couple of years to deliver the levelling up funds, and that there may be circumstances where waivers will need to be applied and approved because that will provide value for money. I think they should be exceptional, but the underlying reason and rationale for approving a waiver should be that doing that and deviating from our set standing processes provides value for money for the council and for council taxpayers. And I think the purpose of this report is to demonstrate not only how often we're doing this, but within the annex there's a reason for that. And so you can see that the rationale set out, and that we are, even if we're deviating from set processes, by doing so we're offering value for money to the council.
Councillor Hopkinson.
Thank you. I just want to, you have to excuse my ignorance, but I just want to check my understanding of a waiver does it mean that the conditions that set out in the tables but on page 101 would not apply for a particular purchase? Thank you. And also just a minor point really, but the table on page 102, I just wonder if, you know, if that was presented as a percentage of the total purchases, then that might, because you keep referring to, you know, the idea that, you know, it should be exceptional, so that might help us to sort of see that.
I think that's a very good observation, and that perhaps could be a better comparison rather than against other authorities to give an idea of how much of our spend is waived in totality in terms of overall spend. So yeah, we can look to add that to the next report as well.
Any other questions? Councillor Duckworth.
Not really a question, but I'd just like to speak in favour of waivers. Because having worked on the Margate Town deal, I know they're really quite important that it's possible. And looking through the table, it's always done for very good reason. So it just helps us get on with things. And central government often give you ridiculous timescales in which to do things. And so it's really important.
Perfect. Unless there's any questions or comments, the recommendation is the committee notes the report. Would members like to note the report? Great. Moving on to agenda item 9, Local Code of Corporate Governance. I'll introduce you to Estelle Culligan, Director of Law and Democracy, who will introduce this report.
Thanks very much, Chair. Good evening, members. So this is a report to update the Local Code of Corporate Governance, which is one of our suite of governance documents. It's referred to in the annual governance statement and was last updated in 2019, I think. It should be reviewed and updated regularly, so this is that update. The report and annex, where you'll find the documents, reflects the CIPFA and Solace Good Governance Framework for Local Government 2016 document, which sets out 7 principles, A to G, of good governance, and those are the headings in the document, and they require councils to provide evidence to demonstrate those 7 principles. It's quite a lot of information in the document, and it does show that we as a council are doing lots of good things re governance, as well as reflecting the work still to do due to the statutory recommendations that we've received. So where previously the code was only accessible through a link on the annual governance statement, the intention is to publish this document as a standalone document together with the annual governance statement on the council's governance page, and therefore it will be more easily accessible and also promotes our obligation towards transparency of all these issues. So that's it. The report is for noting and approving, I think, and unless anybody has any questions, well, if you do, I'm very happy to answer them.
Councillor Duckworth.
Yeah, on page 140, I struggle to understand it's the bit about recognised trade unions, and I think the reason I struggle to understand it was because there should be some commas in there. It was, I'll go to it and then I'll tell you exactly where. Sorry.
Councillor Duckworth, I'm not on ModGov, I'm on the, because I can't get it to it. So if you could tell me which section it's under, B or C or...
It's principle E.
Oh.
And it's bullet point 3 on developing into our entities capacity. That one is
Yeah, so, yeah, I think it means engagement with recognised trade unions, through employer council.
And more informal meetings.
Yeah, because it looked as though you're engaging with recognised trade unions and somehow the employee council were involved in that, and it's two separate things. I was a bit confused for a while.
I see what you mean. Engagement with the recognised unions through employee council and more informal meetings. No, I think it actually means engagement with the recognised unions through employee council, because we do engage with them through employee council, and also.
Well, can you tell me a bit more about that? Because it's do what we
The organisation, the council, has regular meetings with union representatives, and we entitle them employee council. So that's the name of the meeting that we have regularly with the union representatives, both from GMB and Unison.
Oh, right. So it's not a separate employee council. No, it's not. That's just a question. Yeah.
I think it's the name of the meeting. Itself is called employee council, but who sits on employee council is the union representatives, both regional and our own local representatives, and the appropriate. I sit on there along with an HR officer, and we often have our finance colleagues coming along as well, because often we're talking about budget implications. So that meeting talks about things that generally impact on staff, and we use that as a forum with which to negotiate with unions or inform union representatives.
Do you have a joint negotiating with joint unions, or do you have a separate employee council for each union?
Caught me there. I think we have separate ones with each of the representative unions, so separate one with GMB and then a separate one with Unison. I think that's the position.
So, like negotiating committee.
It can be when we're talking about the pay award. Yeah, that's the process we follow in respect of that.
Councillor Hopkinson.
Thank you. Yeah. So can I just clarify then? So that means that you don't negotiate with more than one union jointly at the same time. It's always done separately, one union at a time.
We have the discussions with both representatives at that meeting, but then the unions go off and meet with their respective members, consult with their respective members, and then feedback separately the outcome of those kind of discussions they've had with their unions. So they are separate union activities, but they come together as part of the employee council. We use that one meeting in which to share what the council's policy around a range of staff activities, whether it's staffing policies or whether it's to do with the annual pay award. We have that discussion initially at that meeting at the employee council. Then those union representatives go off and consult with their members and then feedback. Does that clarify? Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments from members? Okay, the recommendation is that the committee adopts the revised local code of corporate governance for 2021. Should it be 2021 or should it be 2022?
It's 2020. No, it's 2022. Yeah,
for 2022. Apologies, there's a typo.
It in 2021. 2022.
Please can I have a proposer and a seconder? Proposed by Councillor Hopkinson, seconded by Councillor Duckworth. Thank you. Unless I hear any objection, I will take this as approved. Great. Moving on to agenda item 10, Annual Governance Statement 2021/22, Action Plan Update. I'll tend you back to Estelle Culligan, who will present this report.
Thanks very much, Chair. So this is a very brief report. It's a regular update on where we are with the progress of the action plan for this year set out in the Annual Governance Statement, which we published in early January, having been approved in December. The report and the update is self-explanatory, it's fairly brief. The main issues to note are, of course, reference to the statutory recommendations, the updates to the financial procedure rules, which have been successfully carried out by Mr. Blundell and his team, and the most recent updates that we've had to the Constitution. So it's very straightforward.
Do members have any comments to make? Great. The recommendation is the committee is asked to note the report. Would members please note the report? Perfect. Moving on to agenda item 11, Chair's Annual Report to Council. It says here, hopefully you read my annual report to Governance and Audit Committee. Add any comments you might like. Yeah, I'm fine. Do any members of the panel have any questions? That gets me off the hook. Would members please note the report? Thank you. Agenda item 12 is the exclusion of public and press. I move that the public and press be excluded for the meeting for agenda item 13 as it contains exempt information as defined in paragraphs 1, 2, 3 and 7 of part 1 of